Greetings everyone, my name is Buck Business. Konnichiwa, I'm Kawaii Critic, and today we're here to review My Little Pony Season 7, Episode 17, To Change a Changeling. So, we begin this episode with Starlight-san and Trixie-san going on to visit Tharak-san at his hive. But before they can arrive, they're nabbed in a little net by an unchanged changeling by the name of Pharynx-san. And according to Thorax, a little bit later on, we discover that these two are brothers, although that still is a bit confusing how that all works. You would assume that they were all siblings to an extent. Again, that's my assumption, but whatever. So, apparently, he's the only one who still hasn't changed, even after Thorax's more stand-up attitude toward them. So, meanwhile, the changelings are taking on these other activities since they no longer have to do this hive stuff and hunt and track and do all that sort of stuff. So they're taking on more gentler activities like theater and just talking with each other in a certain area. Meanwhile, Starlight and Trixie, well, mainly Starlight at first, wants to help deal with the situation with Pharynx, and I'll just say this, his dialogue is pretty poor, especially toward the beginning of the episode. It's very direct, and it's also very unnecessary. I mean, he says how he likes the way things were, and he wanted things to stay the way that they were, but we could see that by the way that he looks. He looks like a normal changeling, so of course we should expect that. I mean, the only reason that sort of dialogue would be in there is for anyone new coming in on this episode. And it does kind of get repetitive after a bit. I think he says something along those lines at least twice, maybe even 3 times. I'm not sure, but yeah, it wasn't great. Anyways, Trixie got used to being called the second best, so there are a few stabs in this episode towards characters. Mainly that one stuck out to me as a very, as Starlight said that to her based on the information she was talking about Twilight. However, Pharynx-san calls them both losers and then just sort of flies off. And this little feeling section, it feels like one of those drug addiction circles, except they talk about their feelings, so it feels more like a safe space. Nightmare feel that is. And Pharynx-san, of course, overhearing the information about him because they bring him up, so he sort of calls them out, and he learns, I believe he learns, or they talk about him wanting to be banished. So Starlight-san, interestingly enough, kinda wants to give up on the situation, and I felt like that moment in the episode kind of betrayed her character at this point in time. I mean, she doesn't seem someone who would have given up at that point in time. It just didn't feel right. I mean, she was in that situation where she saw like the end of the world, and she was seeing that Twilight-san wasn't giving up on her, so the whole thing about them two being a lot alike, well, that kind of goes against that, since Starlight was like, why don't we banish her? So anyways, we get more of the changeling backstory as little Babbies, as we see Pharynx-san stick up for Thorax-san and then bully him only afterwards. So, before Pharynx left, Starlight had this plan to essentially have him save the hive so that they could accept him, but that only made the creature that was apparently going to come after them get closer, and thus Thorax goes with Starlight and Trixie to go eventually to rescue him from the impending doom. So Starlight gives a speech to the other changelings, and at first they don't seem affected by it, but then I guess they have some sort of talk afterwards off screen, because they come in a little bit later on. So Pharynx is fighting this mole-like creature alone, and the other changelings eventually come in, and the magic that both Starlight and Trixie are performing aren't strong enough to pierce this mole-like creature. Although, again, the whole magic being used as a plot thing here, it feels like very weird, since Starlight we know is very strong with magic, but I guess whatever. Anyway. So they get the mole, that being Thorax and Pharynx, to hit itself until it retreats. And after that, Pharynx shares his feelings about loving the hive, and thus he's able to change into just like the others, except he has a much darker design. He sticks out much like Thorax himself, but again, just in a darker tone, a very dark purplish color. So who knows if that character will be playing a significant role later on, but who knows what the plans are for that. Anyway, Starlight and Trixie get a little bit of blame that the plan kind of went haywire, but it all kind of worked out a little bit in the end. And as far as this episode as a whole goes, the pacing of it was very odd. It felt very rushed. And some of the dialogue, as I mentioned, was a little bit rough around the edges. But other than that, it was a pretty interesting episode to see that one changeling left and sticking to the old ways. And they sort of try to placate to his desires of the old way to try to change his mind, but that didn't quite work out. But in the end, he came to that conclusion in his own way, which is probably the most important way to come to a conclusion, and then he was able to share his love in his own way. So that is our review. Stick out, ting tong tori. So if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, farewell everyone. Bye!